Joining me now, my former House colleague, Pete Hoekstra, who served as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Pete, we welcome you back to America's Forum for our daily intelligence brief.
And Hey, JD, it's always good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, it's good to have you. Pete, first of all, the president saying that 300 Special Forces troops can be deployed as special advisors. Your take on that announcement yesterday?
Well, I wish what the president would do is announce what the objective is for America and for the Special Forces troops that we are going to be sending in there. Now, are they going in to maintain the current status quo, which is a partitioned Iraq? Are they going in to defeat ISIS and restore Iraq to its former borders? What's the objective? Don't tell us, well, hey, I'm going to send in a few troops and those types of things. What's the objective that the American people believe and that the president is communicating to them? This is what I want to do and why it's important to America.
Pete, you've spent the week in Europe, specifically in the Netherlands. Yesterday, General David Petraeus, the former director of the CIA, was speaking in London, and the Daily Telegraph covered his comments. Here is what General Petraeus had to say, quoting now, "If President Obama and other leaders conclude that the threat posed by ISIS is significant, then I would support actions to target high-value ISIS elements. If ISIS is seen as a terrorist organization with the potential to engage in terrorist acts beyond the Middle East, then that could warrant the targeting of high-value targets," close quote. Sounds to me like the general is talking about sending in the drones. Are you in favor of that?
Well, again, I mean, number one, it sounds like General Petraeus has put a lot of caveats with that. If ISIS is determined to be this kind of an organization, if they are capable of doing these types of things, absolutely is capable of these types of actions. I think it is their intent ultimately, again, to target the United States, to target the West. I believe that's what our European colleagues over here believe. They are all very disturbed about the continuing developments in Iraq. They're also worried about what's happening in northern Africa and other parts of the world. The one consistent message, and maybe as surprising as it is, but when I've been in Southeast Asia, as I've been in Europe, and as I've traveled to other parts of the world, the one thing that I hear is people are yearning once again for American leadership. They recognize that there are things that only America can do, and right now they don't see America doing it. And as much as these people have criticized us in the past, today they are looking for American leadership.
Well, along those lines, Pete, former Vice President Dick Cheney weighed in on the crisis in Iraq. It's a column that appeared in the Wall Street Journal that has gained attention, some accolades, and some criticism. In an editorial written, as I mentioned, for the Wall Street Journal, former Vice President Cheney writes, and I quote, "Rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many." Of course, Cheney's detractors say that description could apply to the administration in which he served. The politics of who lost Iraq aside, should Congress look into who ISIS exactly is?
Oh, look at who, what this is, and
we are having some difficulty. Pete, we'll try to reestablish our contact with you. So we'll try to get back to Pete Hoekstra. Obviously, this is a major concern, and the question comes up, and it may seem, well, it's not inappropriate because it is inevitable where politics and policy intersect, just as we saw really at the halfway point of the 20th century. With reference to what had transpired in Korea, or really the revolution of Mao in China. Even though we had no troops involved in China per se, the question became who lost China. And then following our actions in Vietnam as the North Vietnamese came in and took over in the 1970s, the question became who lost Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So there is always a political price to be paid, or at least blame to be attached. As we mentioned earlier, the Wall Street Journal editorial by Dick Cheney taking to task the Obama administration. But to be fair about it, there are folks on both sides of the aisle who say, wait a minute, the reasons for going into Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction, doubtful at best in retrospect. So really, when you take a look at the blood and treasure spilled and spent in Iraq, as we come away from this, what situation do Americans face in terms of relationships with the rest of the world? And so there is a point for legislative oversight. If we reconnect with Pete Hoekstra, we'll try to talk to him about what committees of jurisdiction, perhaps it's his own former intelligence committee, to really drill down on ISIS, the personnel involved, our interaction in Libya, who we helped to arm, and what ties might exist between those groups in Libya and ISIS. And as you take a look, the point has been made earlier this week, you see the areas under ISIS control, the cities under ISIS control, Mosul in the north, perhaps being the most significant, along with Tikrit, the birthplace of Saddam Hussein. And you look on down, reports having ISIS within 40 miles of Baghdad, if not closer. So an area about the size of the state of Indiana, where geopolitical borders have been torn asunder or blurred to the point where there are many who suggest that all the talk of the establishment of a 21st century caliphate, it will take place there between what we now know as the border of Iraq and Syria. But we are rejoined by Pete Hoekstra. Pete, we thank you for your forbearance. My question gets back to congressional oversight. What can Congress do? Let's say, for example, your old committee, the Intelligence Committee. Who needs to drill down and find out specifics on ISIS and the American role in training and arming people in Libya?
Well, I think not only should Congress do it, and that would be the Intelligence Committee, but also the administration. What we're finding, I think what we're going to find here, JD, and I was afraid of this in Libya, is that the folks that attacked Ambassador Stevens, killed 4 Americans brutally in Benghazi. I believe that we're going to find, I would not be at all surprised, let's put it that way. I would not be at all surprised if in the investigations we find out that they were, some of them were trained, they were equipped by NATO forces to overthrow Gaddafi, and then some of those same individuals turned on the U.S. There's also been lots of rumors about, arms trafficking to the Syrian rebels. Again, I wouldn't be at all surprised, and this is what we need to look for, because we can all learn from this. Republicans, Democrats, Congress, and the executive branch, when we're dealing with radical jihadists, that someone who is your friend today is going to be your enemy tomorrow. And a lot of times in this part of the world, you rent your friends, and if someone pays them a higher price or they achieve their objectives that they wanted to when they were working with you, they will flip sides and they'll be your enemy tomorrow. And I think we're going to find that with ISIS as well.
Pete, a minute and a half remains. Let me return to the question. It is fraught with political significance as we determine elections via voting, and of course people try to crystallize these arguments. The question is going to come up, who lost Iraq? How would you answer that question?
Well, the bottom line is, number one, the Iraqis lost Iraq. Ultimately, it is going to be their responsibility. The U.S. and our allies that perhaps are going to have facilitated that process because Iraq was not ready to go on its own, not having a status of force agreement with the Iraqis that would allow U.S. intelligence, special forces, and some residual military folks in Iraq after, the most significant pull down of troops. That was a huge problem. A lot of people saw this coming. The question was how long it was going to take.
Pete Hoekstra, we thank you for your time and your daily intelligence brief via telephone from Europe. Thanks for renewing contact with us. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Hey, thank you.
So there's Pete Hoekstra's take. What's yours? We'd love to have you weigh in on the discussion. Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also email. Our address, connect@newsmaxtv.com. And don't forget Facebook, facebook.com/Newsmax. We're coming right back on America's Forum.